Hello everyone, Dr. Samantha Cotrera here for the Imagining a New We video blog, a video series designed to help history teachers and other history educators teach history in ways that are more meaningful, transformative, and inclusive for their students. You'll see I got a new microphone because we're doing a lot of video series this fall. We are doing today's series, Mondays Are Meaningful. We're doing pandemic pedagogy in the middle of the week. And on the weekends, there is Source Saturday. A lot of S's, but the idea is to get historians and creators to come and talk to you about how they read particular primary sources. Last week, we talked to Dr. Andrea Eidinger about a cookbook from the 1950s on Rosh Hashanah. This coming week, we're talking with someone about how education had to shift during the Spanish flu, and I'm really excited about that one. And the idea is that they'll model for you, these historians will model for you how they read primary sources, but then you can also bring them into your classroom as a way to get your students to think about these histories in more kind of complex ways. But it's Monday, Mondays are meaningful, and so I wanted to start by doing these little short videos reflecting on theory, which was the idea of the Imagining a New We video series when I started in January. And, the pandemic meant we got to have all these great conversations, and that's fantastic. And so I just thought that as a way to kind of start your Monday, even if you're watching in the morning over coffee, and I brought, a mug today, although there's no coffee in here, it's actually iced English breakfast tea, or later in the evening, or of course at any time during the week, that I could, highlight some elements of theory that I've reflected upon that you might find useful to reflect upon in your own practice as well, which again is kind of the idea of this, of the whole video series, to just help expand the ways that we're thinking about histories and our practice and our students primarily. And, when I was thinking of quotes and stuff to bring into this series, I mentioned this last week. I was going through different articles and trying to figure out how I would put things together. And then I was like, no, I've done this work. I wrote a book. So my book, Transforming the Canadian History Classroom, Imagining a New We, is coming out September, October. This is still a fake copy, but I still hold it near and dear to my heart. I'm so excited for you to read it. And I just thought I would pull quotes from theorists that I found useful from the book, so that if you wanted to read more about it or think about it in relationship to other things, you have the book to be able to use as a resource, as well as looking at the source material to begin with. So one of the things I like to talk about is this notion of imagining a new we, and that we have to think about, we have to imagine all of the, I don't know if you saw a cat just came up there. We have to imagine all the different ways that we come to our classrooms to learn and teach history. And last week I talked about unconditional and invitational education, and today I also want to talk about two ideas that I see going hand in hand. So Tony Waters wrote this article about 15 years ago when he said that when he talked to his former high school students who had gone to college, his students said that when they went to college, they thought the history they were taught there was real, because it demonstrated conflict and contention and critique, whereas the history they learned in high school, they thought was fake because it was overly patriotic and positive. And so he was like, what are we doing when we're setting up this dichotomy between this real history that students think is real in colleges and universities, and a fake history that they're being exposed to in high school, elementary school and high school? Because for many students, they're not going to go to college. And so that's the only ways that they are going to that's the only way they're going to formally learn kind of a historical narrative. On the other hand, I also like to pair this with James Wertsch's work. Ooh. Those are syllables. Those are a lot of syllables as well. And he found that ethnic Estonians, when they were asked to recall certain elements in history, and so this is a study from about 20 years ago as well, He found that ethnic Estonians could say the official version of the history. They could say the version that the government wanted them to know, that was in the curriculum, that was in the textbooks, for example, but they believed a different version. So they were able to talk about and say, yes, I know this is the history, but then really when you ask them closer, they believe this other version of history. And so to me, and I just want to highlight, there's a sleeping, purring cat there. Say hi, Betty. Yeah. Oh my God, she's so adorable. I hope you don't mind. I mean, I don't even care if you do. They're just so cute. And so these dueling histories are in our classrooms because students recognize that what they're learning in the classroom is a particular official narrative that is and this is a quote from one of the students in my study for this book, what the government wants you to learn. But then they know that there are other stories. And so my prompt for you for this week is to think about how many histories are in your classroom and what are the mechanisms? What are the ways that you invite, drawing on last week, those histories into your classroom for worthy study? And this is not about doing like an oral history assignment to say, figure out where your family was, and then you don't do anything with those oral histories. And in fact, I talk about a situation like that in my book. But rather, how can those oral histories, for example, how can the histories that students have in their hearts, in their belief systems, how can that challenge what you're doing in the classroom? How can it pivot the ways that things are presented? How can it do something, how can it allow for something different than what you initially thought at the beginning of the year? How can this allow the whole class to imagine a more complex we in Canada? So I talk about connection, complexity, and care. That's what students want. To bring in like an oral history assignment to ask students like, oh, tell me about your family's history during this time period. That's connection, which is great, but that doesn't go far enough for meaningful learning in history education. The other part is that complexity. So how can we tease that out in order to learn something new about Canadian history? How does this shape what we understand about the Canadian past and present? And then care. The care is believing that that is worthy for study. Believing that the histories that students are bringing into the classrooms, that they understand is more real, that they believe more. And I just want to be clear, I'm not saying they are more real. I'm saying that they believe them as more real. How are you caring for those histories and those stories in your classroom? And that notion of connection, complexity, and care, when brought together, that can't help but center students' learning and their experiences at the center of your history classroom. Now, I recognize that there's a curriculum and you can only do so much, and you're not an expert in all of your students' histories to be able to teach them. And that's why I just want to highlight, like, you don't need to be. Like, you don't need to be an expert in those histories. You don't need to be, to understand all the things that they are bringing in. All you need to do is to be a facilitator of learning experiences where you say to students like, okay, this is the curriculum. This is what the curriculum says about World War II. How can we challenge this kind of notion of World War II based on your family's histories? How can we learn more about Canada and World War II through your family's histories, through the things that you believe about history? And the beliefs that students have about history might also be from the media, from movies, movies, TV shows. Allow them to talk about that because, oh my God, I didn't actually plan on using this citation, so I'm totally blanking on the citation, but it is here because of the magic of video. They were saying that to replicate or to replace students' one-dimensional, often metaphoric understandings of history, it needs to be replaced by something that is also metaphoric, that is also that builds on that in a way that makes sense for students. Because again, Joseph Novak says that for meaningful learning to occur, students need to be able to connect to prior knowledge. They need to have meaningful material, and they also need to agree to learn. They need to be able to say, yeah, I think that that's important to learn. I appreciate this teaching me something new. And so to be able to draw on students' prior knowledge of how they understand history in a way that is full of care for the stories they already have, sets the groundwork for students to be able to feel comfortable learning in that space, and that they come to see the material in more meaningful ways. So what I'm saying is that needs to be a key element of the discussion in the classroom, and that doesn't mean it needs to replace the curriculum. Oh dear, means it needs to replace the curriculum, because that's impossible. But it means that you need to be okay not being an expert in everything in order to allow students prior knowledge to guide the direction of some of the learning, and you facilitate that guiding, and you facilitate those connections to the curriculum as a way to build your class. So I talk about historic space. That's a kind of conception of history education I've been working with for about 20 years. The videos are up now. The website is up now for you to kind of think through how maybe to do that in the classroom. But remember, Waters said that students articulate that distinction between real and fake history. And Wertsch found that people could say a particular history but believe another one. And so if you take nothing else from this video today, think about how you can allow those dueling histories into your classroom in more explicit ways, and that will create more meaningful learning opportunities for your students. So I hope you have a great week, everyone. This week on pandemic pedagogy, I'm talking with June Finley, who wrote her master's thesis maybe 10 years ago on the problematic elements of the We charity and about charitainment. And so since We is no longer going to be operating in Canada in the same way, it is a fascinating talk for you to think about how you can funnel some of those social justice activities that you may have been doing in your history classroom in different directions. And then Sandy Barron is going to be on Source Saturday this week, where he's going to be talking about the focus on a school for the deaf in the 1920s and how they had to shift some of their practices because of the Spanish flu. So it's going to be another really great kind of series of videos this week, and I hope you enjoy them and get a chance to watch them. So have a great week, everyone. I hope that you feel like there's a little bit of a groove now that we're a couple weeks into back to school. I know there's going to be more challenges, but like I said last week in the Mondays Are Meaningful videos, when we create space for reflection, it allows us to build our resiliency and to build our toolkit of things that we can do to help support our students as well through this very difficult time. And I hope that you have a community around you that of teachers and other educators where you can productively vent and reflect on the things that you are experiencing in classrooms. Not just, as I talked about last week, and I've talked about in the book, not just complaining, because there's an element to complaining that means that nothing can be done from it. So I hope you have a community around you where you all can productively think through the difficulties of your work right now in ways that can benefit yourself, your soul as an educator, and your students' lives as young people in this very confusing world. So anyway, have a great week, everyone. Say goodbye from me and Betty, who is pretending to sleep, but I think really she wants to play. She's amazing. Have a great week, everyone. We'll talk later.